Now, New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon says that there is a chance to remake multilateralism as Asia faces a more complex security landscape. While speaking to CNA's Angela Lim, he highlights the Indo-Pacific's growth potential, but added that prosperity must go hand in hand with stability, while balancing New Zealand's economic ties with China against wider geopolitical pressures.
New Zealand has always been an open economy. That's been a very trade-oriented economy. We have 1 in 4 of our jobs are tied to trade, and we're very externally oriented as a people. So for us, having freedom of navigation to make sure that we can move our products and our exports all around the world, which have been booming and growing over the last year or so, is really important to us. And that's where Singapore and us, we both advocate very strongly for freedom of navigation, upholding UNCLOS and the law of the sea, and making sure that ultimately there's a resolution here, because what we don't want to see is a precedent where there is tolling or taxing of a Strait of Hormuz that actually could impact other waterways that both countries utilise to move their goods and services around the world.
The Middle East aside, how does New Zealand see or assess the current regional risk outlook when it comes to regions like the Indo-Pacific, specifically the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea?
Well, for us, we see huge opportunity in the Indo-Pacific. I mean, this will be a huge driver of the middle class of the global economy. This is where huge amounts of growth sit. Yes, we have challenges, which is why, at a regional level, we've been forming relationships with lots of countries across the Indo-Pacific region, because we think it's also about where we can drive tremendous prosperity in this part of the world. But also in 2026, you don't get prosperity without having security. And so those conversations are inextricably linked, as we've seen, through a Ukraine crisis and conflict that's actually ended up creating economic pain and suffering in Western Europe. And as we're now seeing with this Iran conflict, where we're seeing huge pain and suffering for many people all around the world because of energy challenges as a result. So, we need to make sure that we work together well across this region. We have huge opportunity. We think it's a tremendous engine for global prosperity. We appreciate that the rules-based order that countries like Singapore and New Zealand have relied upon is changing. Increasingly, it's moving from a multilateral world to a multipolar world, where power, dominates and increasingly dominates. But yet, the new order isn't yet fully determined, and there's a chance for countries like New Zealand and Singapore that believe in the rules-based system to remake multilateralism as a result. So, for us across the whole of the Indo-Pacific region, there's opportunity and prosperity, but it's also making sure that we, de-escalate. We have, ASEAN centrality is so important in that context, to making sure that we have peace and prosperity.
Yeah. How are you evolving your defence partnerships in the Indo-Pacific to cope with these more complex security threats?
Yeah, for us, it's about forming, lattice work, mini lattice work, type agreements with, lots of different like-minded countries. And so, first and foremost, it starts at home. We've got a big investment in our own defence capabilities being built out. We'll spend 12 billion New Zealand dollars in the next 4 years. But we want to make sure that we're interoperable, for example, with our closest ally, our only ally, which is Australia, so that when we're building out and securing capital and equipment, that we're actually very aligned and we can be a force multiplier for each other. And obviously Singapore is a key part of that as well. And we've got a huge interest in unmanned vessels, as has Singapore, and there's areas of collaboration and platforms like that as well. So for us, it's about recognising that we need to build out both security and trade relationships with groups of like-minded countries.
Yeah, and speaking of that delicate balance, on one hand, China is New Zealand's largest trading partner, and then you also have very deep defence ties with the US and also Five Eyes members. How is New Zealand striking that delicate balance, especially with the US and China increasingly tense with the relationship?
Well, look, I mean, New Zealand has proudly its own independent foreign policy, and that is similar to Singapore and many other countries. I'd argue every country probably has its own independent foreign policy, and so for us, we make our own decisions. But yes, we do have very strong and a long-standing relationship with China that's built up over 50 years. We collaborate where we can. We've had growth of almost 9% in exports into China over the last year, and there's lots of areas of collaboration in the trading space. We also have different political systems, and actually we have differences, and we raise those differences publicly, privately, predictably and consistently. So it's a very important relationship, and it's important to be very clear and consistent with how we manage that. But likewise with the American relationship, we also are not strong believers in tariffs. We just don't think that is the way forward. That's not what the world needs. And so, we've made our position pretty clear with the American administration as well, is that that's something that we don't think is a good thing. But yet we still got to find ways to collaborate, but also differ where we must as well. So for us, it's essentially that sort of mantra is the way we manage those relationships.